All right, so we're going to get started here without any further ado. My name is Aaron Doucett. I'll be your MC for this afternoon's presentation. And again, we're here for the AppGeo webinar, Moving to an Imagery Content Program. Just to kick things off here, I'd like to let you all know that today's webinar is part of a larger webinar series. You can find all upcoming and past events at our website here, appgeo.com/events, as well as prior recordings. We have a full, exciting calendar of events coming for the year to come, so be on the lookout for some pretty cool stuff. Just a little bit about who we are, AppGeo, for those of you who haven't heard of us yet. We're a geospatial company based in Boston, Massachusetts, but with staff throughout the whole country. We've been at this for coming up on 30 years now and have seen a thing or two in that time. And we're here to help you with not only your imagery needs, but strategic planning, consulting, and quite a lot more. So we encourage you to learn a little bit about us as we go, and hopefully we can learn some things about you. From here, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. So you're joined by, first and foremost, Bill Johnson, our Carpe Geo evangelist here at AppGeo. He brings to the table 35 years of GIS experience and was formerly the GIO of the state of New York. And at that position, he oversaw their development of their imagery program, now in its 20th year. So quite the legacy upholding. Matt Peters, you'd think he's a man who needs no introduction, but I will offer one anyway. He is Utah's third GIO and the director of the AGRC, the Automated Geographic Reference Center at Utah. He is an active NISGIC member and master of coordination and collaboration, a graduate of the University of Utah, and in his free time, an avid cyclist, outdoorsman, and as you can see here, a fine tuxedo purveyor. So a warm welcome to Matt here. And also we are joined by Richard Wade, GIO for the state of Texas. He brings 32 and counting years of GIS experience, alma mater of Texas State University. And his free time, you might find him flying a plane around your neighborhood. He is an aviation enthusiast and an RC pilot. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill Johnson for our agenda for the day. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and welcome everyone. I'm really pleased today to be joined by two of my favorite GIO colleagues, Richard and Matt. And if you can show those next slides there, Aaron, that'd be great. So I had a couple of extra photos here we want to show you of Matt. This is our agenda, by the way. But here's a couple of, I asked both Richard and Matt to send me some photos to show the real them. And this is actually what Matt sent me. I have no explanation for that first photo. So we'll just leave it at that. The second photo is the one we had in the intro, and that orange tuxedo is what Matt wore last Saturday on 10/10/2020. He finally got married. And so that was what he was wearing for his wedding. And that third photo doesn't really belong there because it's kind of a normal photo, but there he is up on the bluff overlooking the Green River in Utah. And moving to the next slide here for Richard. I love that first photo of Richard because he's a man after my own heart here, working with some woodworking tools. So he's got a nail gun in his hand, putting up some fencing with the pneumatic nailer. And there you see him in the middle with one of his radio-controlled aircraft that he has fun in his spare time with. And then that third photo, he's standing in front of a granite wall after a hike. So these are two great colleagues and friends, and really looking forward to the session today. So the way this is going to work is it's going to be kind of an interview format. We want to keep it conversational and informal. But before we get into that, I would just want to give you a little bit of background. Imagery's been around for over 100 years, and I first started dealing with it in the late 90s in the state of New York. And in those days, the imagery was actually captured on film. And I recall that in the early days, we had a vigorous debate with our community about whether it was worth the extra cost to go from black and white to color. And our initial program in the late 90s was 2-foot resolution black and white with buy-up options for color and higher res. So we've really come a tremendously long way since then. When we fast forward today, what we see is that imagery has moved from a specialty product for a few kind of hardcore geo geeks to something that virtually everyone is using. And it's hard to imagine a GIS application without imagery nowadays. But what's really interesting is that in the last decade, there's been a significant disruption in the marketplace for imagery. And that is because these big internet companies discovered that their mapping sites were very popular and a great way to attract eyeballs to their sites, which is the basis for their advertising revenue. And so they've made major investments in sophisticated mapping systems, including imagery. And starting a few years ago, Google decided to start offering the imagery that's in their products to states. And both Utah, started with Utah, and then Texas were the first 2 states to take advantage of that. So these guys truly are the trailblazers that were the first states to go down this path. Both of them are now on their second rounds of content programs. So these guys have been there, done that, and learned to how to navigate the issues around this. And so I think this conversation today will be a really great way for the rest of you that have maybe been looking over the fence and seeing what's going on, but are not sure about it, maybe wonder how it all, how you make it work. And so with that, what I want to do is start with you, Matt, because you really were the first one, and ask you about what was it like, what was going on in Utah back a half dozen years ago when you started to negotiate for the Google imagery, and what was the debate like? How did you make that decision?
Well, I think it was about the time the pioneers were coming into the valley when we started to think about this. But I think you got to think back in time where we were. You know, there was talk about NAEP being defunded. There were other programs such as 133 Cities that had wrapped up. And we needed to find a solution for imagery that would not send us scrambling each year with uncertainty and things like that. Utah already used Google products and at a state level, and so there was some idea of who Google was, and AGRC could never be a primary customer. You know, we could only be secondary just because of cost. So as we started to negotiate and think about this, the price, terms and conditions of use were a real key issue, and a big factor for us was that, okay, if everything goes wrong, we have hard drives of the imagery that we can have in perpetuity. We don't own it as such, but we have it. And we felt like that was kind of a good insurance policy. And also, we negotiated that all contractors working for the government would be able to access this imagery. And so I felt like it was a really good thing in reducing costs to agencies because the imagery was going to be free. So more time could be spent on analysis and what the problems were and not on data collection.
Great. Richard, how about you? What was the process like in Texas?
Well, thanks, Bill, for doing this and having me on. I appreciate it, and I apologize that sometimes I get distracted when Matt talks because I'm expecting he'll say something and I'll start laughing and then I'll forget what the question was. So I'll do my best here. But our situation was a little different than what Matt was just describing. We had a program that was actually solid. We had the Texas Ortho Imagery program that was going on for the last 20 years or so. And there wasn't a real need for us to do any of this, to be real honest with you. But I think what really, really kind of excited us about it at one time was, obviously it's 6-inch imagery. And when you're dealing with 6-inch imagery, that's kind of a game changer. When you were looking just a few years before, we were looking at, half meter or even 1 meter just a few years before that. And so when you can do 6-inch, all of a sudden it's a game changer. And so the way we took it was, we're not going to replace our program. Our program is solid. There's no reason to do it. But maybe if the cost is right, maybe we can take it and we can use Google as a supplement to our own program, and not replace it, but just something we can use in case for some weird reason they, our agencies, state agencies couldn't see what they needed to see on the ground. Then they could pop over to Google and take a look at that. That was really how we were looking at this from the very, very beginning, because realistically, we didn't really think they would be able to deliver on all the things, some of them that Matt just talked about, on our licenses and how we were going to use the data to be any sort of replacement. So that's what that's the way we took it the first time. And yeah, we were surprised, actually.
Great, I really appreciate that. So both of you are now on your second round, and you've switched over from Google because Google has withdrawn from the market for this licensed imagery, and you're now both with Hexagon. So I want to know what's been different in the second round. I'm sure you both learned some things in the first round and probably wanted to negotiate some different licensing terms. So let's talk about what's been new in your new deal. Richard, let's start with you this time.
Okay. Yeah, our new deal, obviously from our perspective, we had to maintain what we had in the first deal. And that wasn't a slam dunk by any means. We really were not sure if anybody would be able to offer what we had. But this time we were really wanting to focus on more of the image quality and integrity. Google had a great product, but the only issue we really kind of had with that is the dates were all over the place. So if you looked at the state of Texas at a state level, it was looking like a quilt, because we had ranges 4 to 5 years apart in some cases. And that's not necessarily a good thing when you're trying to do some work and literally the image next to you is 4 years older than the one you're looking at. And you have to kind of know what that is. So what we really took to the table this time was we really wanted to get that integrity of that imagery down into more of 1 to 1.5 years in duration for acquisition. And the quality, we really wanted to minimize our shadows. We wanted to minimize the building lean. And just have the general orthophoto correctness throughout the entire thing. So we really wanted to focus on that this time, and it really wasn't about cost, to be honest with you. Cost was secondary at this point. We really wanted to get what we wanted, and if the costs weren't too outrageous, that would be okay. So that's how we settled.
Wow, that's really surprising to hear you say that cost was not a major factor in your second round. Because what I see is what's attractive about these programs, kind of right off the bat, is that they are so much less expensive than custom collect programs. Excuse me. So really surprised to hear you say that in the second round, cost wasn't a big factor for you. Anything further on that? I mean, that's such a surprise.
Yeah, no, I mean, the real honesty on this is that cost was already, we had already, what's the right term here? We already saw the value in the cost that we were paying before. I mean, because when we had our own program, we were tripling that cost. And so we were down, 66% of the cost of what it was before. And so we were comfortable with that. So if anybody came in lower than that, yeah, it would be intriguing, but we were comfortable paying what we were paying. So that was really kind of the driver on it. We didn't need to go lower. We wanted higher quality for our money. And so we were prepared to pay for, what we were expecting to pay.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Matt, how about you? What was different in your second round?
Well, the second round, I guess, there was a variety of things, but I think one from the first round, things we really enjoyed was the help and the attention that Google gave Utah in creating products and getting us on the right track and things. They had a vested interest, but they were very good to work with. But I think things we didn't enjoy was the Utah divided, like Richard said, this quilt patchwork, small blocks. They were problematic because they could cut communities in half. And each flown at a different time, and like Richard said, it got a bit cumbersome, and not knowing what rural blocks would be flown. We couldn't really plan with communities to say, yes, we'll get you data in X year. And just that things were flown and made as available to us for purchase. So what we wanted after that, we wanted, okay, let's just get statewide coverage all the same year. Our urban areas are growing. Let's get a larger standard area of interest for an urban area if that's flown separately. And then we just wanted those additional flights over the years to be part of the contract that they would happen.
Okay, so you bundled that all into the same deal.
Yeah, and you know, it just allowed, you know, I guess going back to Google, I felt like now with Hexagon, I could approach the agencies with what the requirements were. They had experience with Google, so we kind of had that as a baseline. And I think with each iteration of Imagery, and I see this as our third iteration coming up in another couple of years, that we'll do more things. We'll think outside the box more.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do with both of you now is let's probe a little bit on some of the policy issues. You know, when we're talking about licensed content, it's different. You don't own the data. There's actually some restrictions that are embedded in the licensing terms. And so, you know, we often hear, for example, about the importance of government data being released in the public domain. So I'm curious to hear from each of you, you know, what sorts of policy debates went on within your communities as you pitched this and got folks to agree to it. Matt, let's start with you this time.
Well, I think that, you know, sure, the public domain thing was an issue, but I feel like, you know, it's kind of like you got to remember this was 6-inch imagery, you know, better than we had previously. And so we also, even though we were nervous about NAEP, we still had NAEP. And, but at the moment, you know, it was public domain as well. So we felt like, okay, we got this high resolution imagery that we can stomach it being licensed. We have NAEP for other people, but even though Hexagon and Google are not, it's not public domain data as such, you know, it doesn't mean that the public doesn't get some benefit from it. When you look at all the web applications that have imagery as their backdrop, it's just that we don't want people downloading it. That's kind of against the licensing. And I think the main takeaway from the whole thing is that when it comes time for getting this imagery, and whether it's public domain or not public domain, is very much a situation of talking with people and getting buy-in from a wide range of folks. And I think that people can appreciate that the high resolution imagery is, I guess, for lack of a better term, more special than the NAEP. And so they're willing to have a little more flexibility there.
Interesting. Richard, what sorts of policy debate questions came up in Texas?
Well, I think in a way, as Matt had said, you know, we probably had a little bit more of a debate when it came to the public domain side of things. And I think that was really, really critical. One of the big reasons we didn't want to forego our own program was because our own program puts it in the public domain. And so that was an issue for us. And realistically, that became kind of our driving factor here. And when we started with Google on the first round, that was probably the only thing we didn't really get out of it, was that public domain side. And so obviously the debate was, again, about the integrity of the imagery and the quality, and also to having a little bit more control on the timing. So we knew when new imagery was going to be flown and when it was going to be available. That was always a big thing. But the one thing that always stuck in our minds that we couldn't really get past was the public domain side. And with our new agreement with Hexagon, we actually have the public domain covered under that. And so all of a sudden we have this interesting dynamic we didn't have before is, well, it seems like everything that our old program was doing, we can do in the new program and save a lot of money doing it. And so, yeah, so it's been real intriguing to see how this is playing out, where we didn't think any other organization or company would be able to provide what Google did. We're actually seeing that people are and are able to do it. So I would say that was our big thing, was probably keeping things in the public domain. It was is a game changer for our side.
So you're going to have to explain that a little bit here, Richard, because it seems like public domain would be against the terms of the license. So how were you able to get that into your deal?
Yeah, well, and like you said, when we approached them, we figured that would be shot down pretty quickly. But the fact that what they decided to do, Hexagon actually was already anticipating this, and I think what they decided to do is we would take the 6-inch imagery across the state, and that would be what we license and do the things we need to do. If you take it and you dumb it down a little bit to maybe 1-foot resolution, that could be the public domain site. At least that's what we were, talking about, and that's what ended up being accepted. So we basically have a slightly higher res project, well, a substantially higher res product in the 6-inch for the state, and a 1-foot product for the rest of the state, for the public domain side of things. So we felt that was a really good trade-off. Again, when you compare it to our old program, we didn't lose anything, and so it's kind of it's a no-brainer. It was an easy thing to agree to.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Another issue that we hear all the time is this issue of leaf on and leaf off. Neither of you mentioned that yet, but I know you both have opinions on this. What I hear is that, Western states where there's less deciduous tree cover, it's maybe a little bit less of an issue. But still, especially in the states on the east, there's generally a high interest in leaf off imagery, and most of this content data tends to be leaf on. So I'm wondering what, how you deal with that, since the data that you're getting under the content program is presumably mostly leaf on. Richard, let's go ahead and keep this going with you first.
Sure. That is actually a really good question. And I think that's going to be more something we talk about more internally here in Texas. But, I think it really boils down to the fact that we have been so mesmerized by the resolution change from what we had to what we have now, that the leaf on off stuff hasn't been as big of a debate as you would think. Don't get me wrong. I think everybody is on board with we want leaf off. That's what we really want. But the fact that we are actually able to use the imagery and see a lot more detail is been what we've been focused on, and not necessarily that debate. But then there's the other side of it, though. You mentioned that. I mean, we have very mild winters here in Texas for the most part, especially southern and in eastern Texas. So our mild winters, sometimes the trees don't drop their leaves anyway, so we don't have much of a season when it comes to leaf on and leaf off. And if we do have one, it's extremely short. So in a way, we've been kind of used to that a little bit already. But I think when we start getting really wrapped up into the 6-inch imagery and start using it for a while, and then there's the leaf on option, you know how we get spoiled, right? So we'll get spoiled with that, and then eventually we'll start complaining that, well, we can't see underneath that canopy. We really want leaf off. That's just how it's going to be. So the debate's not over. It's just been pacified because we've been getting other things. So I'm pretty sure we will have that continuing for sure.
Okay. Yeah. Matt, how about you in Utah? The leaf on, leaf off, much of an issue for you?
Well, not as much, but it is similar to Texas. And in times, Utah, you have snow on the ground, and sometimes the leaves don't leave the trees until they're kicked off by the first big snowstorm. So it's a real challenge to get the right window to do a flight that would be just leaf on or leaf off, and also just the snow that sticks around or comes early that kind of destroys the flying season.
Yeah. All right. I'd like to move on to a little bit of discussion about licensing terms. I'm curious about whether you've found it difficult for the folks that are using your data in the content program to comply with the licensing terms. And any limitations on how they can use the data, and also if you negotiate, what you negotiated into your deal that may have been different from the vanilla licensing terms. Richard?
Yeah, Matt actually touched on this. Again, you're not expecting that you're going to get everything you want when you're talking to a company like Google or even some of the other companies like Hexagon. Originally, licensing has always been an issue, and Matt touched on this. When you got agencies that need to use your data and you've been granted the ability to use the data, agencies don't do everything themselves. They contract out a lot of it. And so one of the licensing terms we had to have was the ability for our contractors to be able to use the data as they wish to use it, as if they were an extension of us, which they were. And so that was one of our biggest things that we had to overcome was contractors have to do it. And that wasn't an easy thing to get through until AppGeo came up with Giza. And when Giza came around, that allowed us to control the licensing and the links that we provided out to the contractors, meaning we could turn them off and on anytime we needed to do so. And so we could mitigate, or we could control that. And I think once that became apparent we could do that, Google had a much more open stance on allowing us to do those kinds of things. So as far as I'm concerned, having the ability for our contractors to be able to use the information was one of the very, very first things, and then have access to other things like the color infrared imagery and the abilities to upgrade and do those kinds of things are what we see now as our options to move forward with our licensing. So yeah, it's come a really long way, but it's been fascinating that we've been able to make these agreements, and it makes a huge difference in Texas.
Yeah, that's really good. Matt, what's your experience been with the licensing issues?
Well, I think this is kind of where my predecessor and Google really come into play, is because the terms were so broad under Google that it was easy just to turn to Hexagon and say, please match Google. There are a couple things, I would change going into the future. I don't think we left enough room for nonprofits to use the imagery in their work. And I think at the moment we're also where once new imagery is available, the old imagery will stop being streamed, and it will be up to AGRC to stream that data on our own. I think both of us, just like Texas, the Giza appliance with AppGeo is the perfect thing to control users and to adhere to the licensing terms. And it's just been good all around. And so there may be a few things we tweak the next round of imagery, but at the moment we're living with what we have.
That's really interesting. Another thing I think is kind of fascinating is the way competition, and you guys have been speaking to this a little bit about, how you were able to leverage what you had in your first round to get better terms in your second round. But, I think this element of competition in the marketplace is really important to buyers right now, because the companies in this space are eager to grow their market share and to be accommodating and to kind of ratchet things up over what the competition might have. So I'm just curious, how flexible you found the companies to be in negotiating these things. Richard?
Well, clearly, as Matt mentioned, when you have something, you don't want to go backward. When you've got something you like, you only want to improve on it. Going backward is not an option. And so Hexagon has actually been, they did their homework. They knew exactly what we had, and they knew they couldn't just come and match what we had. And they did their homework, and they came back to us with options, with things that we didn't get, and the things we actually pitched to them, like a public domain product and all the things we had under Google. they were prepared for to negotiate those things. And so that was surprising, but at the same time, very refreshing. So we understand that there's they understand there's a competitive market out there, and we benefit from that. You know, where Google was the only player that could do something like this, there's multiple organizations now, companies that can do very similar stuff. And so we're going to take every bit of advantage of that at the state level that we can. So that's how it worked for us.
Great. Matt, what about you? What kinds of flexibility and how was it, how was dealing with the companies in terms of flexibility here?
Well, I think that, one thing that lended itself right away to good thoughts and flexibility items was the willingness for Hexagon to expand the urban area of interest for us. Because we felt like our urban area had grown a bit and we wanted to change the AOI on that. Because, it was a real pain previously when a community would be cut in half and half wouldn't be updated. Mm-hmm. Also, we wanted Hexagon to blend a 30 centimeter and a 15 centimeter because we had 15 for our urban areas and 30 for the rest of the state. We're trying to mimic what we had with Google, so they worked on that with AppGeo. But I believe that now we're kind of well on our way with this contract. The next contract, I'm looking at, okay, well, what about additional buy-ups for a city? What if they wanted to get 3-inch of their city? Or maybe their city has changed enough and they'd really like some simultaneous LiDAR collect. So I believe that kind of like we just got to be thinking of new things and what might help run the business of government better, what information we can glean from these companies.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. So you're already thinking about ratcheting it up further on your round 3 here. I'm curious about, other things that you might think about for buy-ups. I mean, you've mentioned, higher res in the urban areas or anything like leaf off as a buy-up option. Is that something you might be interested in, or what else is on your wish list?
I think part of it will just be to go back to the interested parties in Utah and say, okay, you've had Google, you've had Hexagon, you've had these various things happening. What is important to you now? The market, I feel like in the next few years is going to go in many directions. We have people like Here and Planet that are doing imagery, quicker collects, but less resolution. But maybe that is perfect for some uses. So I'm not sure if the future, how it will work or what way it will take us. But I think most of all, we need to be in tune with our customers, in tune with the people in Utah, and be able to make sure we are bargaining for what the customers want. And that we can modify the program to get the best value for partners. Yeah,
good point. Richard, what about you? What are you thinking about? Yeah, I know your ink is hardly dry on your deal for round 2, but I mean, you probably already have some thoughts about a round 3.
Well, it's interesting because from our perspective, as I'd mentioned before, when we had our own program in Google to be a supplement, it's been reversed essentially. Our program will now be supplement to this online service that we currently have under Hexagon, because really what we're going to try to do now is take advantage of some of this, content plus the program that they have, which basically means if we do need leaf off on certain areas, we can use our program to fund those types of upgrades. So if we need to make a spec change or do something slightly different, we will be able to do that under our program. So I can see leaf off being one of those things. I can maybe a higher resolution in an urban area where if we wanted to go to 3-inch, we could do something similar to that. And so the bottom line is, I think that's the beauty of this new version of the application that we have, is that we're not limited. we can ask for things and we can get those things as a part with the same exact quality and consideration that the full program does. So we're really excited about those options, and they're going to make a big difference, and we plan to take advantage of them as well.
So just to be clear, are you saying you're able to get out of the content program what you in the past would have done with your custom collect program?
Is from what we can tell and the way it's been working and talking to our stakeholders, absolutely. It looks like we can get everything we want out of this content program to the point now where we've made kind of an informal decision. I wouldn't say it's been formalized in any way because you never know what can happen, but to use our program and our funding for our program to supplement now this new imagery service that we have in Texas.
Interesting. So you're going to shift funds over from custom collect into the content.
As of right now, yeah. And until something changes, this is how we're going to operate.
Yeah. You mentioned the decision process here. I wonder if you could speak to that. You know, are you as state GIO able to make the decisions on how this imagery program is going to work?
I mean, yeah, the answer to that is I could, but I don't, because pretty much everybody in the state is smarter than I am. So why would I make those decisions on my own, right? What I do basically, or what we've done here at Tenris, we've developed a GIS solutions group, which is made up of stakeholders from the major GIS agencies around the state. So we have input from all these other people who have a real need. And what we'll do is we will go into that group and we will lay out our options at the state level and say, we can do these things or we can't do these things. What is the best for us as a state as a whole? And I think that's one thing I really want to bring up is, you know, to be a part of the group, sometimes you have to think a little larger than just what you want. It's what benefits the state. And those people who make up the solutions group are those people. They may say, well, I'd really prefer this, but I think the state benefits because more people want it this way. So we'll concede to that. And so the decision's made at a collaborative level, and then that's how it gets done. But in no way would I try to do it on my own because it's just not the right thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds like you just gave a very good job description for what a GIO is all about. It's all about collaboration and serving the community. That's great.
I read that somewhere.
All right. So, you know, both of you are in very large states, and you've got statewide coverage at 6-inch resolution. That's a huge volume of data. So I want to probe a little bit about, what your game plan has been for serving that up, because that is just such a big lift. Matt, let's start with you.
Well, it's kind of like we knew we really didn't want to set this up and serve it on our own infrastructure. It was going to be a heavy lift. And the idea that Google was going to deliver this data on the Google Cloud platform, it gave AGRC a good excuse to kind of make a move for the cloud. We thought we'd go ahead and serve it using Google Maps engine. However, that was very quickly deprecated. And then AppGeo began working on the solution that is now Giza. But ultimately, I feel like this is kind of part of a bigger picture of what is happening, that we as GIS professionals need to focus on doing GIS and not back-end IT. Let the back-end IT people do their job. As a GIS shop, we're here to promote GIS in Utah. And we don't do that from a server room or from hiding in the office trying to figure out why a system isn't going. And we do it from contacting people, educating people. And we kind of got to get out there and get everybody their salmon, their mashed potatoes, things like that sort. So then they're all fed, they're happy, and we can think about doing better things with GIS.
Wow. Okay. Salmon and mashed potatoes. That's what's on the menu in Utah. Great. So, Richard, that doesn't sound like an entree in Texas. So, what are you serving up?
No. It would be steak and mashed potatoes maybe, or something like that. But no. We'll let Utah have the salmon. No, Matt's exactly right. I mean, I'm glad you brought this up because that I haven't even talked about serving up this imagery the way, you know, half the cost is storing and serving the imagery. I mean, if you were to buy 6-inch imagery for Texas right now, well, at least a couple of years ago, it would have been in the neighborhood of about $18 million to buy the imagery.
That's a custom collect contract.
Custom collect. If we were to do a custom collect, it'd be about $18 million. That's what we calculated before. And then on top of that, you're going to have several $1 million to serve it and to store it. Even in cloud infrastructure with all the egress fees and everything that goes along with it. We were estimating in the round $25 million total to do this thing. And we were getting the imagery served as a part of this deal. I mean, you know, and Matt's right. We didn't want to have a crew now maintaining in IT, maintaining these servers and making sure they were up at 99.9% of the time and all those kinds of things you have to worry about. This was just being done, and by the best company on the planet who can do these kinds of things, Google. And now, you know, using other cloud infrastructure and storage capabilities, that is a huge thing that we don't have to worry about anymore. So that was probably also another big reason why we're foregoing our own program in favor of the imagery as a service model.
Yeah, wow. Those numbers are just staggering at 25 million for one round. So that kind of begs a question about, like, how have you made the funding work? How did you get agencies to contribute? You know, what has been the funding approach? Let's keep it with you for a minute, Richard.
So the way we did it, Bill, was we did the pass the hat kind of thing originally. The bottom line is, if you don't have any stake in the game, you really can't you can't say anything, you know. And I think our GIS community group and our stakeholders knew that. And so the fact of the matter is we have lowered the cost substantially as a part of this program, Imagery as a Service, to where we could collect from the different agencies who use the program. We've got a tiered approach. So if you use it a lot, if you're a power user like our Texas Department of Transportation is, you're going to pay a premium, but that premium is pennies compared to what they've been paying for you know, some of their programs. So it makes it worth it. And then of course, if you just use it a little bit, if you just have it in a viewer, then you pay very little into the program. But the bottom line is you still have input into where we go with this program. Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge part of it. And so the pass the hat might seem like a kind of a bad thing up front, but realistically, people want to contribute to it because they want say in how it formulates over time.
Okay, makes sense. Matt, what's your funding model been in Utah?
We pray. Initially it was pass the hat. There were a lot of willing partners that really contributed large sums of money for Utah. Then we had a partnership of a variety of agencies doing a kind of a mapping and information partnership that provided some funding for some of the small purchases. And next we worked on a legislative appropriation to get X dollars per year for geospatial data, which we say is imagery. And,
has that been successful? Have you gotten that legislative appropriation?
Received that appropriation, and it's allowed us to almost fulfill our bill. And we've had a few partners that chip in that make it reasonable. I don't sweat bullets anymore.
Good. All right. Very good. We're getting near the end of our time. I want to wrap up with just a question on the kind of the human element. What surprises, you know, what things have you learned that were unexpected, or maybe you've got an interesting story that's happened with your program? Matt, anything from you?
Well, I don't know if you've heard of Little Bo Peep, but that's probably a story for another time. The main thing for me is just, you know, that outreach that you need to do as a GIO type person, and the willingness of the departments to contribute real money to the effort. I think it's don't be afraid to reach out for cash to try to sell it. Also on round two, you know, I kind of heard bits and pieces. People say, well, I don't want to pay for something that I'm not making decisions on. And so, you know, just to include, get a coalition of people together. I think just the more the merrier to get buy-in so you'll be able to receive the funding you need.
Great. All right. Richard, I'm going to let you have the last word here.
Well, I agree. I think what we learned, Bill, is not to actually go out and don't be afraid to try something new that you haven't tried before. You know, Google was not something we were expecting. We were not planning on using it as much as we thought we were going to. The fact that it panned out the way it did is saving the taxpayers in Texas millions of dollars. And so we've just learned that, you know what, take some chances every once in a while and see where they lead. They may turn out to be big, they may not, but you learn from that. And then realistically, I think it's just important to know that we've really started to trust our public-private partnerships that we've you know, put together. We have a strategic mapping program that has been around for 20 years, and we've now got a contract by which we have these vendors on that we can just go and choose product and go choose acquisition and so forth right out of that. Just a few years ago, we only had 15 to 17 on that contract. This year, we are negotiating with almost 40 different vendors to be on this contract. And
wow.
That's just one of those things that says, if you want to succeed and move forward, take advantage of these public-private partnerships. They've got ideas. They've got some thoughts to this that may help you do it versus you trying to muscle it in all on your own. You can make a lot of headway, and so that's what we've learned out of the program, and we're going full down that road. So that's where we are.
Sounds like you're saying success breeds success.
Well, it does. It has so far.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both, and I want to also reserve some time here to take questions from our webinar audience. So have we got any questions, Aaron?
Absolutely. So we're just coming online here with some questions. I already have a few in, and I want to encourage you all to ask some more while we have these fine gentlemen on the call here today. Just a couple coming in here originally. This one looks like more of a comment. Maurice Coleman says, I'm jealous of that beard. So I can tell that's a good one here. A couple more. Here's a funny one. This is the Mark from Texas. He says he also likes Sam. He's shocked you didn't say barbecue.
Oh. Dang. I would rehearse this. I would have said barbecue.
There you go. These are all off the cuff. So a couple more here. How do I best get state leadership on board? You know, what has been, you know, the response from the governor office on all this? If anyone wants to address that.
Richard, why don't you go?
Yeah. From state leadership perspective, we had the same issue in Texas. I think you have to demonstrate its value. One thing I truly believe in at the state level is you show them somehow. I don't know how you know, I don't know the particulars, but what I would do is somehow show the value, show them how this is going to help them specifically. If I did this, you will be able to do these things. And if they can see it, then it goes a long, long way. You know, proof of concept, proof of value, those kinds of things. You're going to probably have to work a little bit up front, but realistically, the end result will pay off, and it's been extremely successful in Texas.
Great. Yeah, Matt, any comments from you to add?
Yeah, one thing that I felt like was a kind of helped push us into getting some permanent funding was just that any chance we had to include imagery in some type of a high-profile government website, such as for voting or things of that sort, and I could turn around in a legislative meeting and say, your organization, the Office of Legislative Research or something of that sort, used X amount of data or imagery or that type of thing, I felt like it was really like, oh, that's, you guys are the ones that do that. It's kind of like a wake-up call for them.
Yeah. All right. And I could throw in a little story about in New York a few years ago. You may recall in the news there was two guys that broke out of a prison in Dannemora up in the North Country area of New York, and they were on the lam for 2 weeks, and they were hiding out in these remote hunting camps and things up in the woods in the North Country. And the state police were trying to use the imagery in Google Maps, which was leaf on. And the state's leaf off imagery was where you could actually see all the hunting cabins. And it proved very valuable, in a situation like that. And that got the attention of a lot of the state leadership. Yep. All right. What else we got for questions there, Aaron?
Super interesting. We have a whole bunch coming in, so feel free to ask more. Jim Sparks asks, how has the horizontal accuracy been so far?
Who wants to take that? Matt, you got any comments on horizontal accuracy?
I don't have a good comment, but it is a published specification on that from Hexagon. And I can get that to you, Jim, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But it is better than what was being given by Google.
I would agree with Matt on that. The specs from what our staff has told me are within reason, within par of what we would expect them to be. With Google, that was not necessarily the case all the time. So it just kind of depended. But in this particular case, you're looking at somebody like Hexagon who knows how to do these projects and actually do this for a living for surveyors and others, and they know exactly what the specs are supposed to be. So, yeah, Jim, maybe it'd be best if we can give you those exact specs, but we know that they haven't been a concern for us.
Awesome. Just moving on here. I missed the beginning of the webinar, but what is the imagery provider that Matt and Richard use?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
No. You guys should answer. Go ahead.
So on our side, it's Hexagon is our new vendor or new contractor for the imagery provider who's replacing Google that stepped away last year. So and Hexagon, like I say, is a very capable provider, and we're very excited to start to use it. We're actually getting ready to do that now. So.
Excellent. So we have a couple questions here that are very similar. Do you have any comments about the performance, such as speed? And then have there been any issues integrating into the GIS environment like ArcGIS or other software packages?
Matt, you want to take that one?
Sure. So there was the speed. So what happened was, yes, in the very early days, when we first started with Giza, before it was Giza, we did have some issues because we needed to tune the whole system, get our number of servers and things correct. But once that was taken care of, everything has been fine. There hasn't been speed issues. The only issue I think that we have with integrating into various products is it sometimes is a little rough for some of the CAD users. But from the GIS side of the house, there's multiple platforms that this imagery services, because they are WMTS, can be brought into. The CAD users are a little different, and there's usually one more hurdle, but it does work.
Richard, anything to add?
I agree with Matt 100%.
Okay.
Awesome. I want to make sure we get to all these. This couple coming in from Bruce. He's asking, for regional agencies in Texas, is there a limit to the amount of users that can access the imagery? And can we provision users to partner cities or counties for, say, 911 addressing coordinators? And then a follow-up question to that on the technology side. Is WMS2 supported for Texas Imagery Service, and is caching available?
So the answer to that, there's a twofold here. You ask a really, really good question. The answer to that is yes. This whole licensing model is open to any governmental entity, county, regional, statewide. If you are one of those, you can subscribe to this service. So there's really no problem. And as it relates to can you provision to partners and so forth, the answer is yes. Depending on what you're trying to do, it may or may not change the cost on that. So that would be something we would have to kind of talk about a little bit, but normally it's minimal, if at all. And the other thing I wanted to bring up too on this is that if you're a 911 addressing coordinator, and you have access to the 911 data and those kinds of things, we'd like to talk to you about that, because sometimes we can offer the program free of charge if there's information we'd like you to contribute back at the state level, to the state level. And so we sometimes will do that with some of our partners who don't necessarily have the money, but have a product, have something we need at the state level. So we can kind of work those deals. So if you can get my information, or it probably is on one of the slides, feel free to email me directly. And then the answer on the other side, yes, there are cache services available, and there's even download abilities with this as well. And we're trying to support every bit of services that are out there when it comes to your GIS system. You should be able to pull it in. Now, I don't want to speak too quickly on what we're doing right now, just because I don't know if anything's technically has changed, but love to talk to you offline on that.
Awesome. Looks like that answered that really well. Last couple questions here. Do you have any options for oblique imagery, and do you have any experience in using it or implementing obliques?
Okay, either of you?
No, in Utah, there's, the counties mainly get oblique imagery for their assessment, property assessments, but we haven't stepped in that space at all.
Okay. Richard, how about Texas?
On Texas, I just want to say obliques have become an interest to us at the state level. And so as we try to do with everything else when it comes to imagery, going from 1 meter all the way down to 6 inch. Now the next thing is where does imagery go next? And the thought is well, maybe it's oblique. If you do oblique capture, you also get the nadir. And so realistically, that may be some future type of collect that we might try to do at a state level. Obviously, it'd be way too expensive to do it right this minute. But we thought 6 inch was not doable just a few years ago. So. You don't ever say never. Obliques are something the state is taking an interest in and taking a look at.
Very cool. Last couple questions here before we wrap up for the day. Wow, this one's from Connor. It says, how did you get the star from Duck Dynasty on the webinar today? That's a great question. We have that kind of star power here at AppGeo. And then lastly, in what format do you offer your public domain imagery? Is it only available in a viewer, or is there some downloadable option?
There's downloadable options in Texas.
Very cool.
Yes, in Utah as well. And then there was one other question from Phil in Indiana. No, we're saving the money we saved and using it for alcohol purchases.
Yeah.
No derivative products. We just haven't got that far yet.
Yeah.
What was the question there, Matt?
Oh, yeah. So Phil was asked, are either of you using your money saved for derivative products like building footprints or maybe an impervious surface layer?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually happening in Texas. One of the biggest things, specifically relating to LiDAR, what we try to do, LiDAR is an expensive product, but the residual products that you can derive out of it are amazing. and are definitely worth the cost. And so in Texas, we are developing a building footprint and building heights database for the entire state based upon LiDAR and all those related things. And Bill, you had mentioned something before where you're talking about being able to see through the canopy. If you take a good high quality LiDAR data set and classify it correctly, you can see objects underneath the canopy actually quite well. And we've demonstrated that on multiple occasions. So sometimes it's like, well, if we have LiDAR for the area, but we have leaf on, maybe we can take a look at what LiDAR is showing up underneath and see if we can determine anything. So interesting concept.
That is excellent.
Aaron, are there any other questions there, Aaron?
I think we're coming to an end here. I will confess Connor had actually wished you luck on your next trail ride and not about your appearance. So he wishes you all the best. And I want to thank everyone who came on today. We had a great audience, great questions, and we'll be putting together a recording of today's session in case maybe you missed part of it or want to share it with your colleagues. So thank you, Bill. Thank you, Matt and Richard. And we look forward to having conversations and follow-up. So get in touch. Any final closing remarks from any of you all?
No, I just look forward to when we can meet face-to-face and have a beer together.
Absolutely. Soon, I hope.
Yes. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And thank you for attending today's session.
Thank you.
Thank you.